everyone, to this afternoon's sessions. I hope you all enjoyed the sandwiches. My name is Tom. I'm a director at Milltown Partners based in San Francisco. I primarily work with a range of AI businesses, investors, and philanthropies to help communicate about the opportunities and also some of the challenges and threats from frontier AI. And I'm going to be taking you through this afternoon's sessions, so welcome. First up, we are going to tackle the opportunities and challenges of the use of AI in public services. There's obviously been a huge amount of progress here and increasing political momentum here over recent years. We've seen utilities, for example, use AI to spot wildfires or problems in water systems. We've seen chatbots increasingly used to help citizens manage routine inquiries. I actually spoke to a team at a social impact firm yesterday, for example, that's also helping use AI to increase the efficiency of social work, to get unhoused people into work and jobs more quickly. But there are also lots of challenges in implementation. Procurement, as you might expect, can be a huge headache. There are concerns about equity, about accessibility, and of course there are challenges in data privacy and compliance. I think to see an example of how not to do this, we need only look across the pond. Elon Musk, Doge, getting increasing criticism for feeding sensitive federal data in AI to target budget cuts, for example. So lots to unpack. To help us understand this landscape, we're going to be joined by a range of speakers today. So please join me in welcoming Sue Daley, Paul Maltby, Duncan Brown, Imogen Parker, Kirsty and Sir Nigel Shadbolt. Please welcome them to the stage.
It's a real pleasure to be back on the stage. I was chairing before on industrial AI, and now looking at the other side of this is around AI adoption, but in the public sector, in the public services, which is vitally important that we get right as well. I've got a wonderful panel to explore this quite broad topic. Because as we know, the use of artificial intelligence has the potential to transform public service delivery, making it faster, more tailored, more efficient. But the public sector is diverse in nature, right? It means the impact and implementation will vary across different parts of the sector, but also different departments. Some may be well positioned to realize this potential now. Others may face unique challenges around adoption and diffusion of AI. So through this, we're going to kind of maybe explore where we are right now. What's the current landscape for AI in government services and public sector? What do we have in terms of visions, blueprints for how we move forward? Do we have what we need? We're going to look at perhaps what's already happening, some implementation that's already occurring. But then also look at, well, what does safe, effective, sensible scaling of AI in the public sector look like, and do we have what we need in our toolbox to make that possible? I'm going to do all that in about 50 minutes, but I have some questions from my amazing panel, but then we'll have some Q&A time as well. So please have your, I said it in the last one, have your thinking caps on, but come up with some really great questions. All tough questions are allowed, right guys? Yeah. All right, well, before we kick off, let's get the panel to introduce themselves. So I'm going to go this way. So Kirsty, do you want to kick us off and tell everybody about yourself and where you're from?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Kirsty Innes. I'm the Director of Tech Policy at the political think tank Labour Together. I spent the first part of my career working as a civil servant and then jumped ship the week that Boris Johnson became Prime Minister to join the Tony Blair Institute, and I've been working on digital government ever since.
You can ask questions about that if you'd like. But maybe, Nigel, great to have you with us.
Great, Nigel Shadbolt. Yeah, I'm the Executive Chair and co-founder of the Open Data Institute. My day job, one of them is to be a professor of computer science at University of Oxford. I've been working in AI. I now was horrified to realise that I went up to the Department of AI in Edinburgh in 1978. That's 45 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's been a few summers and winters.
Yeah. We could definitely ask him about that. Duncan, great to have you with us.
Hello, I'm Duncan Brown. I'm a software engineer, and I'm the head of software engineering at the Incubator for AI, which is part of GDS, the Digital Centre of Government. It's existed for about a year, and our mission is to apply AI to public services such that they get better.
Imogen?
Hi, I'm Imogen Parker. I'm Associate Director at the Lovelace Institute. We're an independent research institute with the mission to ensure that data and AI work for people and society, so that keeps us busy. And I've been working on questions of kind of data, AI, public service reform for the last couple of decades in various different guises, thinking about kind of relational state and public service reform in think tanks, but also really at the coalface, working at Citizens Advice for 3 years and seeing firsthand kind of how it feels when services aren't responsive to people's needs.
And Imogen was instrumental in setting up the Ada Lovelace Institute, so it's really, really thrilled to have her on the panel. And Paul, great to have you with us as well.
Thank you very much. So I'm Paul Maltby and I look after the public services work at Faculty, which is the UK's leading applied AI company. And my career stretches back, I guess, 20 years or so as a public service reformer in government, looking after data teams, digital teams, and before that, policy and strategy teams.
Yeah, so a great panel, I hope you'll agree. And actually, Paul, we're going to start with you to kind of lean on all those years of experience. Because before we look at kind of how do we get to scaling, how do we realise, the potential of AI in the public services across the board, and what do we, how do we get that right? I want to just start at kind of where we are right now in terms of the implementation reality.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we now? What's the vision for AI in the public sector? And perhaps, do we have what we need in terms of the kind of blueprints to the roadmap to move forward? And we've obviously had the Digital Government Blueprint, we've had Matt Clifford's AI Opportunities, Action Plan's been mentioned a number of times today. Talking about, they both talk about AI adoption, right? So your views on what's come out recently, what we have right now, and do you think it's what we need?
Yeah, so thanks. And I think, like as Nigel said, AI, we're all sort of super hyped up about it in a sort of pro or anti or somewhere in between level. But I'm thinking back to probably the first team that I had with data scientists in government was 10 years ago or so. So there's lots of stuff that's going on. Now, I think it's quite weird sitting in a private, in the private sector, thinking about what government has done or what it should do. We'll get into it more, I'm sure. But I think it's quite rare to kind of go, yeah, basically, that's pretty good, right? So the Opportunities Action Plan and the Digital Blueprint for Government, and I think the State of Digital report that goes underneath that. And there's always quibbles around it, for sure. But it's, let's acknowledge that that's a pretty rare situation of going, yeah, okay, great, now let's go and do it. I thought it might just help to give a bit of grounding in terms of some of the work that we do at faculties, work right across the public sector, to kind of get our heads around. This isn't an abstract or sort of intellectual debate, but it's a very practical, operational question. So the sorts of things, I was going to thought maybe to pick out 5 types of things. You can cut this cake in loads of different ways, but 5 types of things that we've done. Now, for a long time in government, first one is around essentially the needle in the haystack problems, right? So it's like finding the bad guys, but of course you can use the same techniques to find people that are vulnerable in public services or that have unusual service patterns through. But there's been a lot of work in faculty elsewhere in government, which is, whether it's in fraud, whether it's in counter-terrorism, whether it's in all other forms of government, of basically finding that needle in the haystack in the data. A second thing, which I think is critically unappreciated, is the degree to which AI, and remember, we're not just talking about generative AI, lovely that generative AI is, but there's lots of different types of forms of machine learning, deep learning, and all the rest of it. But it's in optimizing services, service efficiency, right? So there's a bunch that we do in faculty in the public sector, which is basically around in casework or in contact centres, getting the right thing to the right person. Is this a hard case, an easy case? Is it compliant, not compliant? Is this person someone that we've dealt with before? That sort of thing is chronically hand operated in huge parts of government at the moment. And introduce generative AI in that, so particularly where you've got reading, writing, various different reasoning skills, you've got a next level of opportunity on service efficiency. And it slightly breaks my heart that we're not doing that much more already and haven't been doing that for some years. Then other things, back office data work, getting your data infrastructure right. It sort of makes me slightly weep when teams go, well, we're going to do some AI, but first we're going to spend the next 7 years getting all of our data sorted. And it's like, and actually you can use some of these tools to do matching or to do, like we're talking about taxonomies and automating taxonomies as you're doing data ingestion. There's a lot of sort of back office grunt work that you can do across the public sector as elsewhere using some of these tools and techniques. Then the 2 other ones. So one, basically, I think of it as predictive system intelligence, right? So some of our most sophisticated clients are thinking not just about an AI model here and an AI model here, but almost thinking about a layer of models. So they might have, their core infrastructure, data, AI models, and then services on top. And what that starts to get you to do, we do this sort of stuff in the NHS of how many people are going to come in today, and for this person, when should we start the multi-day discharge process in advance? And should we flip a ward from a male ward to a female ward? So trying to get ahead of what is happening, but like we do with Google Maps and stuff, if I did this instead,
what would happen?
What would happen as a result of that? And I think both for operational leaders, but also for ministers and others, having that sight, particularly across criminal justice system, immigration, asylum, there's plenty of areas where public servants are flying blind. Then the last one is around AI safety. So at faculty, we do red teaming with the Frontier AI Labs. We work with the AI Safety Institute. And so things like OpenAI's last model, our teams were looking at that, trying to break that before it went to the public and make sure that it didn't do harmful things, or if it did, how did it do that, and what could we learn from that? And I think as people are starting, it's never been easier to implement a really sophisticated AI model just with an API call, right? But there's quite a lot of depth and knowledge about how you implement something like that isn't just a proof of concept, but it's something implemented at scale, that it's done safely, that it fails elegantly, that it's designed properly. So that sort of AI safety at the very technical level, but also in the how some assurance for how you have implemented it, I think will be a growing market across public services in years to come.
Thank you, Paul. That's a great grounding as well for this conversation. And Kirsty, I was going to come to you and ask you about the blueprints in the government document. I will come to you in a minute, but Duncan, can I come to you first in terms of, I saw you nodding away, but also just kind of keen on your role and your view from the incubator. It's kind of what Paul's outlined in terms of what's already happening or the opportunities. Is that where your focus and your work is looking, and does that resonate with you in terms of the potential?
Very much. I mean, there are a number of things you mentioned there, Paul. I think particularly that question of trust as we go into actually getting these systems adopted, which is the only way they're ever going to have any impact. And also my favorite subject, which is the structuring of unstructured data, which is potentially this extremely powerful lever we're going to have to kind of change not just the way that we conduct business as usual, but also just completely reimagine that. I think the civil service is dealing with a world which is just much more complicated than it was designed to deal with. It's much more complicated than any of us really know. And anything that's going to give us an opportunity to take a bit of a step back from that, reimagine a little bit, maybe AI is the lever to do that, maybe it isn't. That is kind of quite exciting, I think. So, but to do that, we have to solve that problem of trust. I think it's definitely a growth industry. To me, I think it is like the industry. We need to understand what kinds of mistakes these are. You've written, Imogen, about the sort of the language that we use to talk about it. That is the work, to my mind, is figuring out how we understand the risks, the liabilities, and the opportunities, and how do we put that stuff in a framework that's going to be robust enough to actually depend on it to do anything more than just be a toy, which I think is where a lot of these pilot projects end up.
And we will come on to trust, but just to clarify, do you mean trust by civil servants and those working in the public sector itself to use these tools and to actually apply and adopt them?
Yeah, specifically, if I'm trying to use a tool to get a job done and I'm going to be responsible for those outputs, can I actually take responsibility for them?
Yeah, that's still a challenge that we need to work on.
Yeah.
Kirsty, love your kind of perspectives on what you've already heard, but particularly in terms of, from your Labour hat on, government initiatives that we've seen come out. So we've had quite a flurry, right? We've got quite a lot of documents. They all have AI threading through them. Where do you think we should be prioritising? What's key for you in the blueprint that's been set out, the action plan that's been set out, particularly around AI in the public sector? And what do you think we need to be working on first?
Yep, very good question. And I do think it's been a really good few weeks for the government on digital and tech policy. I think there has been a really good, clear direction set by Peter Kyle when he took up his role as the Secretary of State for DCIT, when he said that he wanted to make DCIT into both a delivery department and an economic department. And publishing the AI Opportunities Review, which is kind of the economic part of that, how do we make AI work for growth, It was the first step, and then the launch of the Digital Centre of Government and the blueprint for digital government is the kind of second part, of course, not only about AI, but includes how are we going to upgrade government processes and systems and institutions to be able to both harness the power of AI to design and deliver services better, and also have the policy response that's agile enough to be able to inform good regulation and good kind of rules around how AI works in society. So I think it's super positive. I think it's actually quite a brave political choice in that, so I spend my career going around trying to tell politicians why tech is a salient issue for voters and convince them that it's like, you know, really central and should be really central to the offer to voters. And I sincerely believe that, because although on the doorstep you won't get people saying to you, you know, oh, I just thought Rishi Sunak wasn't, you know, he was too sort of risk averse when it came to the AI safety debate, and you know, they're not engaging on that level, but they do get a sense of whether or not a politician is comfortable talking about technology or not, and like it or not, it's a really pervasive part of our lives and of the experience that we have day to day as consumers and as individuals. And I think it's noticeable that when you engage with the public sector or public services and you try and get stuff done with government, it can still feel really clunky and really old-fashioned relative to when you do something in the private sector. So I think making the choice to invest in capability first and do quite difficult organisational changes in sort of centralising some of that capability under DCIT is really brave and really important, and I think it will put us in a position as a government to be able to start to show people quite quickly real tangible improvements in services and, you know, more convenient ways of interacting with government, more, you know, more fast evolving services, more efficient services quite quickly. But there is that sort of, that hard work of fixing the plumbing first that has to be done, which I think is like a really important choice to have made.
Yeah, Paul, fixing the plumbing, we talked about that together even for a number of years. So building the capabilities and fixing the plumbing, but also doing stuff, right? So
that's it, right? So
can you do it all at the same time?
Yeah, and you know, so the reason we talk about fixing that Sue mentioned fixing the plumbing is working in government with local government digital leads, of trying to kind of get the sense of you know, together we can kind of build some of the core collective infrastructure, the data service infrastructures that makes it easier for councils to go off and do the bespoke thing that they do in each area, because it's not just one monolithic entity. Now, I think the phrase in a way, like I think I mentioned it before, just that sense of when you're talking to a team and they're like, we'd love to do something, but first we've got to get everything right. Like, no secret, no one's got like really neat, organized data. And if they have, they probably haven't thought about how they're going to bring it into an application. So always improve your data, always fix your data. It's good stuff to do. But I think it is sometimes used as a reason not to do a thing, because some of this change is uncomfortable and difficult. And, you know, whilst we say it's been there for a long time, the actual amount of normal data science AI work in normal government that isn't in the secret bits is pretty woeful, right? You know, there's some good fraud work, there's some sort of classic analysis done with new tools and techniques. But apart from that, we are a million miles away from just a normal frontier, never mind what's coming next. And sometimes I see public service teams uncomfortable with change, uncomfortable with technology, and looking for reasons why, even if they don't say it out loud, but looking for reasons why they can put this stuff off. But we know how to build and scale services. We've been doing it for a while. Start small, pick an important problem that's important in its own right, but collectively those small problems become something transformative.
So Duncan, it's a little bit of what you were saying around that it's that, can I do this? Should I do this? And that, am I going to be responsible for doing this if it goes wrong? So that sounds to me more like a culture thing than it's, is it more the cultural rather than the technology itself that we need to kind of address?
Yeah, this isn't really a technological problem. I think there is a skills issue, which is that the skills that you need to do the evaluation of these very complicated systems are really rare and quite novel in lots of cases. But I think Paul's completely right. I mean, we just aren't set up to support that kind. I mean, there's a lot of good rhetoric coming out of the government at the moment about test and learn and stuff like that. Things need to change in quite a fundamental way if we're going to take advantage of this stuff. And it seems to me that the way to make that happen is simply to do it. Like top-down reorganization may feel like it's called for, like the problem is big, let's have a big solution, but it's all that grassroots stuff and all of those individuals engaging that really makes a difference, and that is culture.
It's interesting that we just need to do it was mentioned in the previous panel as well. It seems to be a theme that we just need to do it. So looking into how do we do it, what does sensible, safe, effective implementation and scaling of AI in the public sector look like? Nigel, I was going to come to you first, if I may. Paul's already kind of teed us up in terms of the data challenges that we still have, the data issues that we still have, but also perhaps that we don't have 7 years to fix the data. What's, looking at your experience and looking at your background and looking at AI's data infrastructure needs, how do we ensure that we get this right, perhaps learn from the lessons that we've had over the years, so that we can make sure secure, trusted data and smart data open data flows throughout public systems? What do we need to be focusing on to get that right?
Wow.
That's a panel all in itself.
That is
right?
a panel all in itself. I mean, I think some great points made already. I'm reminded back to when we first started the open data work in the UK in 2009. This was under Gordon Brown's government. There was huge momentum and excitement, not just in central government, in local government, about the emancipatory power of data, new technologies that were coming along to make it available, and the sense that on personal data in particular, public sector data could be a public good that would create economic and social value. The Open Data Institute was all about trying to promote an effective ecosystem where that could happen and create those two kinds of goods. Of course, coalition government took that forward a little bit, and then we had the madness of just complete political distraction over other big issues that sucked huge amounts of will and effort out of that central issue. And then, of course, AI makes an appearance, and everybody's re-energized, excited, haven't gone away, as Paul points out. But with the challenges we have in going to where we want to get to, it will be hugely about it'll be about the social embedding of this stuff. It'll be about recognizing the skills we need, the informed, the critical mindset we need to bring to using these tools to resist the enclosure of huge public assets by private interests for cents on the dollar. I mean, the real danger is we don't recognize the value of this stuff, and that we build the right contractual relationships with big platforms who could help us scale this. And that's a big part of this, is the contracting piece. We have good models on this, and we thought about this a lot. The challenge we have in any political context like this is generational forgetting, that it's incredibly, we lobotomize ourselves pretty regularly, and people have forgotten the lessons of the past, and it's the past anyway, that content.
We end up repeating
We
them.
tend to. So the question is, what can we learn? Paul's talked about a number of these things, and other colleagues on the panel. It's partly about, it is the plumbing, it is the unfashionable stuff. The data engineering, yes. These tools do offer an ability to do some of the grunt work in that area, but only if we recognize that we might have to go out and not just make do with the exhaust fumes of what government produces. And this, one of the problems we have is that we don't think that if data is an infrastructure, we need to engineer it for a future in which some data that we need to collect, we don't collect as a matter of course at the moment, or it's appropriated in other places. So how, rather than just making and repurposing secondary data, how do we get the primary data that might matter? Not enough thought around that. So the contracting piece, scaling up with public and private partnerships, how do we keep that public benefit as well as private interests going? And I would say, coming back to the fundamentals around what do we need to remember? We need to remember how fast this technology is moving. So we all know the Moore's law. I mean, literally, from when I began in the field to now, the machines are 50 million times more powerful. I mean, that's just a compute.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. The amount of data they've got, insane. And of course, all the assumptions we made about what those services might cost, we can't rely on them from month to month. Literally, big providers who are already wondering how will we make actually an economically viable model out of this are undercutting each other off the basis of new insights about how you could deliver an effective model. The large models are getting larger, the small models are getting smarter. What does that mean? What it means is that the really smart models get smarter partly by being trained on high quality, well-curated data. What that means will vary. It hasn't got to be perfect, as Paul points out, but thinking about where are the national assets. So finally, perhaps the National Data Library, is that part of the answer?
Yeah.
Well, apart from being possibly a misnomer, that this is more of a living infrastructure if it's going to work well. What are the assets? How do we put them to work? And how are we able to move quickly as the demand for these data assets and the recognition we have that there's some data we haven't got that we might like to collect, how do they play together?
Yeah.
Great examples in health, great examples in education. Imagine where you can intercept even environmental data with school data, with our health data. There will be massive patterns in some of that data which will allow us to do some of the proscriptive and forecasting analytics that could be hugely important. So lots of bits and pieces in this. Finally, it's political will. I mean, it is just so much about having people who think this could make a difference, but are informed enough to not just accept the first salesman that comes into town or saleswoman that comes into town, that actually there are some questions we need to ask in terms of the public good we will create, as well as the economic value in
Yeah, and how we get that, given industries is going to be so key in delivering this, how do we get that partnership right? Thank you, Nigel. Now, Imogen, I was going to come on to you because, as Nigel said, it's about political will, but it's not just about, well, political will is so linked as well to the public, right? And what the public think and what the public are thinking. And trust is so, so key to this. And I wanted to get your perspectives on where do we think the public are right now in terms of AI and public services? And how do we ensure that, if political will is and perhaps Kirsty will ask you at this afterwards, if political will is kind of, foundations of it is what the public are thinking. How do we get that right? Does that make sense to you?
Totally makes sense, and I just really second what Nigel said around how do we really centre public interest in this, and then political will can help to sculpt that. So at Ada we've done lots of research with publics, and echoing your point as well, including frontline professionals around where they see AI, where they see it being beneficial, concerns they have, where they see opportunities. And mainly we've looked at that, not at a high level, we've looked at it around different use cases. We've also used lots of different methods, so we've used the kind of traditional surveys or focus groups, but something we've done a lot of is in-depth public deliberations. That's where we might spend up to 60 hours with a diverse group of publics, lay members of the public, and we get them to take evidence from real experts with different views around topics. And they get to a point where they can say, actually, I really understand quite a bit about biometrics now, and this is where I want it used, and this is where I want the red lines. Yeah. So we've looked, for example, at COVID technologies, at genomics and AI, at biometrics, and those kind of very deep ways which get beyond a more superficial kind of attitudes level. That's important as well. So I've had a little skim over the work that we've done in the last 6 years and thought, where are there some really consistent findings?
Use some AI to help you with that?
No, I don't. And I thought, where have we got some really kind of consistent and solid findings that go across individual use cases? And I wanted to bring 3 forward today. So 1, there is no blanket view of what the public think about AI. They are very nuanced in what they think, and what they think depends on what use case you're talking about specifically, not just health, but actually what you're doing with health, for example. So you need to look at it in context. And it also is affected by the actors involved and people's own experiences with technology, which might intersect with their kind of demographic characteristics as well. So it's not enough for us to say, AI is good, let's roll it out, or even AI in health is great, let's roll it out, let's talk to the public about specific use cases. That links to a second point, which is when they can see specific, clear public interest, they're supportive, right? Really high support on things like health. The public interest is very clear around that. But even with more contentious technologies like facial recognition, we found actually the public can see that there can be real value in that as long as they can see why it's being used, what's the rationale, what's the public and social benefit. However, that comes with their support is conditional. And I think it's conditional on 3 things. Firstly, something that often gets skipped over when we're talking about ethics, the public are worried this stuff just won't work. And that's not even because it's cutting edge or kind of complex technology. It's because everyone has had an experience of the government being a bit rubbish with IT or a bit rubbish with kind of painful systems. So a really important priority is this stuff work? Is it tested? Is it going to work for everyone who needs to use it? A second condition, it needs to work for everyone. So when we've done these in-depth studies, like genomics, like around COVID technologies, what we found is people are worried where they think there is a risk of technology creating or exacerbating inequalities or a two-tier society. They're really attentive to that. So not just what's the public interest for me, but how is this going to affect community at large? And then the third condition is around they just want strong governance. They want somebody who is looking out to make sure this stuff is safe and effective and trustworthy. And obviously governance and regulation could cover a multitude of sins. So digging a little bit deeper into the things that actually matter around that. One is explainability. So we found even in the most trusted use cases, so health, for example, people would prioritize that a doctor could explain what was going on than an AI tool was more accurate. Only 10% of people would take more accuracy above the ability for someone to really talk to them about what it was. And that might change, but that's where the public are now. A second one is around transparency, accountability, redress. You know, as one person said, if we know what's going on, if we know we can challenge it, then we can get on board with it. If we don't know what's going on, then, you know, we don't feel in control of that. It might just be kind of big brother. And then the third one, I think there is an anxiety around over-reliance on tech. And again, even in the most trusted settings like health, still concerned that there might be over-reliance on tech or companies, and they still want doctors to be in charge in the health system, for example. So that's, you know, there's lots more to dig into, but I think that gives us a little bit of a steer about where we need to think about public. And if I could just, I suppose, make the case for why I think public acceptability isn't just a nice to have, why this needs to be a real prerequisite to anything we do. I think firstly, we've seen examples where public do vote with their feet around GP, for the GP data sharing. 3 million people withdrew their data around something very technical. So I think there is a risk that if public are concerned about how data is used, they might withdraw their data or their consent. And what that means is the tool's going to be less good and less representative. So I think that's an issue. And it's a real issue as well around professionals. You know, we've done studies where social workers have told us, how can I pick up the phone to tell the family there's been an incident? You know, that nothing's happened. It's just that I've got something in the data. If the frontline professionals don't feel the tool is legitimate, they're less likely to use it. I think we've seen examples of high-profile pieces of AI, you know, in a kind of generous sense, but examples where something goes wrong, it captures public concern, and you see a lot of other really good hard work getting shelved or paused because it just feels like it's too sensitive. So when it came to the A-level algorithm scandal, for example, there were other tools going on that then just had to be put on pause and shelved because the public were too anxious for anything to move forward. So I think that's something we've got to be kind of concerned about. And then just the last point I want to make is around almost a kind of social risk around this. I think whatever we do with data, we need to ensure that the public never feel like they are nervous about interacting with a service because they're not quite sure of what the implications might be. And I think if we see them withdrawing from services, that creates real-world harm, it creates knock-on effects for other services. And let's just take a beat and think about why we're here today in this fringe event and what's going on in Paris and this international summit. You know, we've seen the public, we've seen kind of, across the world, some public mistrust of public institutions, of democracy. We've seen rises of more authoritarian kind of regimes. This is only a tiny piece of that puzzle, but for a lot of people, the way they interact with the state, the way democracy feels real, is actually when they interact with the public service. So it's so important that what we do in that public service interaction feels legitimate, feels like it's responding to their needs, feels like it's something they can trust. Because that is a very small kind of almost pixel of this bigger picture, which is that there is kind of growing mistrust around some of these institutions that we've always trusted. So I feel all of us on this panel have a responsibility to take that public legitimacy question really seriously as we think about the opportunities.
Thank you, Imogen, and thanks for all your work that you've been doing over the years on this, because Kirsty, that understanding what the public feel, what the public want, what they don't want is so important. And just as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, so public reaction to AI and public services, could it make or break the vision, the strategy that the government's put out? And how important is it then for the politicians and the parties to keep that engagement with the public and, bodies that are engaging with the public and supporting them and supporting that civil society kind of public engagement process? We've got to build, how do we build that into the plan as well? Because that seems to be key, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the trust piece is critical. I was thinking as Paul was talking about like just doing it and about adoption in the public sector and thinking that there's, the private sector and the public sector are not that different except in two main regards that you've, I think Paul and Duncan already mentioned. It has to serve everybody, so no one has the choice to stop using public services. So that if we're going to switch to digital means or if we're going to apply AI tools, we have to make sure that they work for everyone or that there are alternatives that work for everyone. And if confidence is eroded in a private sector organisation, fine, you just don't shop at Aldi anymore, you shop at Lidl. But
other supermarkets are available.
Sure. And I don't know anything about the AI tools being applied in either of those businesses. But if you lose confidence in the public sector, in government and in democracy itself, that's a societal level problem which we are facing. And actually there seems to be a strong link between organisations that provide a good service or are, in contact frequently with users and those that are trusted. So you often find weird, surprising to me results where Amazon is highly trusted by consumers and they're not thinking about the sort of ethics or the engagement with workers. They're thinking about, if I click this product, will it appear when it says it will?
Yeah.
And I think there's a good reason why NHS is often most trusted amongst organisations in the UK, because it's the one bit of the public sector that most of us know best and interact with most frequently. But the point I'm making about that is that when you're thinking about how to develop AI use cases in the public sector, we shouldn't only be thinking, would the public see this as justified, proportionate, right? We should be thinking, will this lead to a more convenient, a quicker, a better outcome? Because that builds trust in itself. And your question about how do politicians and policymakers go about integrating public opinion and sort of co-designing these things with the public, I think that's an art form that has kind of has evolved a lot over the past sort of decade or so, but still has a lot further to go. I was really impressed by the work that what was the CDEI used to do, and still I think is doing it in DCIT on public opinion stuff, because I think that was a more conscientious approach to really getting a granular understanding of public attitudes than government has often shown.
The annual surveys they were doing,
Yeah, and I think the work of institutions like i.AI is super important, but I also think that I would want to resist putting out blanket calls for a certain public engagement tool or a certain kind of civic engagement to be used across the board whenever AI is considered. I think you've got to be really careful to tailor the engagement mechanism to the scale of the risk involved or to the importance of the use case involved. And at the moment, I think we are probably still way too close to the risk-averse, overcautious, we mustn't try anything, and we must eradicate all risks end of the scale, than we are to the kind of gung-ho, let's just throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks, move fast and break things end of the scale. So I still think we can do a bit better about doing more public engagement, but doing it in a proportionate way that doesn't hold up or hold back experimentation or innovation.
Yeah. Paul, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good point that Kirsty makes there, and I think one of the many reasons why I like what Imogen was saying a minute ago is grounding this debate around public views, but it's grounding it in specific examples, right? So when we think about where's the debate in and around public services, there's obviously the public as a population, as citizens, as users of public services, but there's also all those many folks that work inside public services, and particularly those, when I think of all the things that could be done, it feels to me an outrage that we're still manually, administratively processing things like we did in the 90s or before, and not using that money to actually help people do a thing or depending on your political choices, give it back in taxes or whatever. And what are the barriers behind that? For sure, there are technical and barriers like skills. We've talked about data and infrastructure and tooling and procurement, I can say more. But, you know, at the heart of that, I see sort of still, you know, the civil service leadership community, which is, you know, somewhat divorced from, you know, the modern technical world and have never really had to grapple with that and are a bit scared of it sometimes, although they wouldn't like to say so. And I also see a sort of, you know, there's a weird sort of like almost politicized culture that's come across with, I think it's like wind blowing from California or something, I don't know. But, you know, you see people either over-gushing about AI is going to solve all the problems in the world. It's software, folks. It's you know, it's very powerful, but it's also hard. But also, I think, you know, almost more, I see, like, back to that thing of, like, people reaching for reasons why it's not now isn't the right time.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe I don't like, you know, what's going on in America, and this all feels a bit like that. And, you know, I do see even within great, you know, the digital public service community that I've spent a long time in and with, there's strands of the thinking there, which is still like, let's find the reasons not to do this, and like, oh, is it AI again? And it's like, come on, folks, this is a technology that's reshaping the world. I want those of us that care about user needs and care about public administration and care about doing the right thing for the public to grapple with this properly, because actually if we keep it at the periphery, or we have like AI strategies that live in the basement and are not connected to organizational strategies, which I think is a bit of a risk right now, then we will not get to the place where the UK is able to be a leader in public services, but also economically. Many of these things, like in education, we're doing exactly as Nigel said, the data and the modelling and the connection of that is good not just for public services, but for ed tech and others. And actually there's a global business environment there and a growth story, not just a public service story.
Yeah, Nigel, I was going to bring you in because you talked about not repeating the mistakes of the past, or not repeating the mistakes of the past. Does this resonate with you in terms of what can we learn from, you know, because we've been in this, we talk about technology for years, right? So are there things that we've got wrong in the past that we can't not repeat now, if that makes sense?
Well, I think, yeah, there are a few things. I mean, one of the things, of course, the challenge is a huge amount of really valuable data sits in our local government, and they're in such challenged economic positions at the moment that the ability to have any space to innovate, to generate and surface some of their valuable extraordinary data is limited. So we need to think about how we can fix that. I think the thing I would say is that one of the things, I absolutely agree with everything around, I mean, ODI has been doing its own work on perceptions around privacy. What are the issues if you contextualize it in use cases? There are very, very different susceptibilities and very different sensitivities in particular circumstances. The other thing that we've thought about quite hard is it's not always just the technical innovation. Technical architectures, they evolve, they change. It's institutional architectures. I mean, the great thing that we all now look back on and say is, why didn't we establish a sovereign wealth fund in the days of North Sea oil? You know, why didn't we? And one of the interesting things about the UK is, historically, our institutional innovation has been one of the things that set us apart, the limited liability company. You know, the notions like, how do we hold data and steward it in a public-private institutional structure that we trust, called sometimes, I mean, variously cooperatives, trusts? Are there ways we could be innovative about the legal structures we can stand up to actually make this stuff available? There's all the appification that needs to happen, some of the straightforward stuff we might think of, but the actual legal principles and the economic return. What do we know about the real economic value of some of these assets, or something better than some rather limited work on this? Although I think, again, this is work that is ongoing, starting to be developed about how do we economically make sensible judgments about the net present value of this stuff now and in the future.
Yeah, and then make decisions based on that. Look, I said this could be a broad-ranging conversation, and it has been. But Duncan, we didn't come on to teams and how the public sector are designing teams, but perhaps we'll come on to that just before we finish. But I just want to give the audience, if that's all right, an opportunity to ask any questions. Do I have any questions for this wonderful panel? We've got about 5 minutes left. I've got all the microphones, so no one can ask anything. Okay, which one do you want? The blue? Okay. So upstairs, just on the end there, I have one. Do I have anyone else? All right, just one question to start with then. And then Duncan, I might come to you with my question I was going to ask you.
Hey, my name's Ollie Carmichael. I work at a company called Adago based here in London. I'd like to get the panel's views on the extent to which sovereignty matters in the deployment of public services across the UK. Everything from location of data centres through to where companies are registered to access to data.
Okay. Who wants to speak? Paul, do you want to keep?
I've got a few, it's a great question. There's so many different ways into it, but certainly, you know, in a UK-born AI company, you know, based out in Shoreditch with 400 odd people, paying UK taxes, developing an AI workforce, not just in data scientists. You know, when talking about procurement, and you sort of like, when you like marginally lose out on those procurements for cost reasons with folks that are not paying their taxes in the UK, are not doing all these other contributions, you sort of feel the sting of that in a sort of like slightly more, you know, national way than I might normally have come at things, I've learned to. But there's lots of really important technical questions about it. I think the thing on sovereignty for me, I thought Matt Clifford's report was really good on this, by the way, but I think there's some quite hard choices for government in coming months, actually, not even years, which is around where is the UK really going to play in this really global, really fast-moving market? Because we sort of can't do everything. And, you know, like 6 months ago, we were said, like, we can't be building models because we haven't got like 500 billion pounds to put in, or dollars was it, and we haven't got like a, you know, Andreessen Horowitz or whoever's funding all the sort of things in quite the same way, so we probably shouldn't provide a big model. Then, you know, actually, you've had Mistral in France for a while, Llama, a different sort of thing from Meta, and then DeepSeek comes in and sort of like sneaks its model in from the other day. And actually, because the tech is moving so quickly, these questions about where should the UK focus are really important ones. I'd say like a couple of things, like quick. One is on the applications layer, so the sort of things that we do, I would say that. But also on AI safety, I think we have the AI Safety Institute. I think this is a type of the market that is evolving, where the UK has got a great foundation, but then we need to build on that. It can't just go, we've got AC, job done. But everyone will have a view. Really nice question.
Really good question. Okay, I have a person just down from the person that spoke last with their hand up. And then is that a scratching of the head or is that a scratching of the head? No, question. Okay, so we'll take both if that's okay. So your question, please.
Thank you very much, panel. My name is Anna Dent. I'm an independent researcher and policy advisor. I would just first of all say thank you to Imogen for mentioning the fact that the public are worried about when this stuff goes wrong, because I think it's sort of come up today, but maybe not enough, and particularly when we talk about public services, when this stuff goes wrong, it can go very wrong, and it can have an extremely damaging effect on people's day-to-day lives. So I'd like to ask the panel, how do we decide what risk is too great and where we should be drawing the lines? Because we have to really, really understand how, if public services don't do what we need them to do, the risk of exclusion, the risk of serious harm to people is very, very real.
Yeah, it's a good question. And then the person just with, yes, with...
Yeah, my question's on the same topic of the relation between trust and reliance. There's a strong narrative in America right now that basically ethics should collapse into acceleration. And if we just get lots of technical people who can work out the bugs so that it's reliable, we effectively are ahead of ethics. So my challenge to you is, to what extent are you feeling that in the public sentiment, that I care really more necessarily that it's reliable than perhaps other aspects of ethics?
Well, I want to say, just on that, and that is a terrible idea. And if we collapse into that, we will collapse. I mean, because it has to be values driven. If you're not cognizant of that, the kinds of bad outcomes, things will break. And people look after the fact and say, it's a shame that broke. The issue about how we put the limits around what our confidence is around, it will be partly case dependent. It will take, I mean, the report that's just been put out, I think, in advance of the summit, Joshua Benyo is involved, really good, actually, on just a framework for how you can make some of those judgments. It is constant vigilance. It's having stress tests. It's the kind of thing that you try and build into a development and a software and a continuous monitoring process, understanding that these techniques come with their individual and various limitations. And if we don't inject that into the conversation and work out what those ethical trade-offs are, we're in a bad place.
So yeah, that's the International Safety Report that just came out ahead of the summit. I'm going to finish just with a question to Duncan, because just on that of like how, because obviously you're building a team and you're helping to coach teams and lead teams within government, within the incubator, and how to do this. Is that kind of ethical risk approach something that you see, or you're helping teams to build capabilities so it's baked in from the beginning? Is that what you're focusing on?
So I quite like to bring this back to what colleagues were saying earlier about that hype and that expectation which you mentioned, Paul, the ill wind blowing from California. We are in a media environment right now where the hype is so strong and so pervasive, and the amounts of money, people are really sort of betting the house on this idea of like the universal machine. And in practice, it's actually the opposite of that. Like, it is not like there is one thing which is going to solve all the problems, and it will have like the perfect perspective and somehow also express itself in natural language. Like, oh, this is a real mirage as far as we can tell. We have not seen evidence of this thing. And that is the kind of environment that we have to present our case for using these systems in. And I don't think it makes the public trust conversation any easier when they've got, Microsoft upselling them on Copilot automatically in their Office subscription, and they've got to opt out because somehow this is the future. So there's a really big narrative story to tell here. A lot of the coverage coming out of the papers, if you want to have an interesting take in the paper you write about DWP's stuff failing, we saw in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, you see the article in the BBC this morning about how AI can't summarize the news. It can't summarize the news. It fabricates and says things that are the opposite of what's true. So to build that trust, we have to start from the ground up. I'm just saying this sort of again, like, a senior civil servant, unfortunately, as you say, Paul, quite likely to be non-technical, is going to be sort of signing off, well, I think that this system is kind of good enough. For my IT people said it was okay, and I procured it, and it cost £2 million anyway, so it's basically going to be okay. That is a real risk and a real anti-pattern that government has to upskill its way out of. We have to understand that stuff, and we have to communicate that understanding beyond the technical sphere. There is no sense in which, I completely agree with you, Nigel, like, we're not going to collapse ethics into technology. That's never going to happen. And if it does, the world will be turned upside down. So it's really on us to reflect, find those skills, understand them, and actually put them into practice in a way where we can point to an example, which I don't think we can yet, and say, this worked, this is what we agreed, these were the parameters, these were the risks. We understood them, we could have a conversation about them, we signed them off, and now we've made it a small step forward, but we haven't made that step yet.
That's where we need to get to.
Yes.
And we need to do it all together as well. There's a role for industry to help government, there's a point for civil society to help government. We all need to be in this conversation.
Yeah, we don't have to boil the ocean, we don't have to fix everything at once, but we have to fix one thing, just to start with.
And then I'm coming back to let's just do it. Let's just do it. On that, we've run over slightly. I hope you'll forgive us. A fascinating discussion. I'm not going to try and summarize it, but I hope that it's giving you some insights into where we are. And perhaps I'm going to say to the AI Fringe, perhaps we can bring the panel back in 12 months' time and see where we are and see how we've progressed. Because this is a huge potential. There's huge opportunities here. So I think it's up to all of us to collectively see how we can make this happen. So can we please thank the wonderful panel, Duncan, Imogen, Nigel, Kirsty, and Paul in the normal way.
Thank you.